The city lights blur outside your window, a tired kaleidoscope against the inky black of a late night. The bus is mostly empty, the engine's low rumble a hypnotic lullaby, the faint scent of diesel and stale air a familiar companion. You're just trying to get home, to unwind, to disappear into the anonymity of the urban transit system, perhaps reviewing the day's events or planning for tomorrow. It's a mundane routine, a safe, predictable journey, one you've taken countless times without a second thought. But what if, in the quiet, empty hours of the night, when the rest of the world is asleep and the streets are bare, the bus became something else entirely? What if the ordinary route veered sharply and horrifyingly into the terrifying, a path not meant to be traveled? Tonight, we climb aboard for 3 true stories that will make you think twice about catching that last bus home, and perhaps make you glance over your shoulder at every empty seat, wondering who or what might be riding with you in the shadows. Our first chilling account comes from Sarah, a dedicated nursing student in her early 20s who worked grueling evening shifts at a bustling downtown hospital. Her journey home always involved the last bus of the night, a silent, almost ghostly ride through the deserted, rain-slicked streets of her city. The bus, a behemoth of steel and glass, was usually half empty at that hour, a comforting anonymity where she could decompress after a long, emotionally draining day of caring for the sick and the dying. It was a familiar route, etched into her memory with the precision of a GPS. 23 stops, a sharp left turn after the old, brightly lit theater, then a straight shot down Main Street to her quiet residential neighborhood, a journey she could almost navigate blindfolded. One particularly cold and foggy Tuesday night, the air outside heavy with moisture that clung to everything, and the distant, mournful wail of sirens echoing through the urban canyons, Sarah was the only passenger left on the bus after the downtown core, a solitary figure in a vast, moving metal tube. The driver, a gruff, elderly man she didn't recognize from her usual late-night shifts, seemed unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his silhouette rigid and unmoving. The bus itself was surprisingly warm, almost uncomfortably so, a stark contrast to the biting cold and swirling mist outside. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, oppressive buzz, a sickly yellow glow that cast long, distorted, grotesque shadows of the empty seats around her, making them seem like lurking figures. Sarah, nestled comfortably near the back in her usual window seat, had her headphones on, lost in a gripping true crime podcast. The narrator's calm voice a soothing distraction, but she remained vaguely aware of the bus's progress, the subtle shifts and turns. She was just drifting into a light doze, her head beginning to loll against the cold glass of the window, when something jolted her violently awake. The bus had just passed the old theater, its marquee a dark, unlit behemoth swallowed by the fog, and instead of taking the usual, expected sharp left turn that marked the true beginning of her residential route, it continued straight. Her eyes snapped open, wide and instantly alert, the drowsiness evaporating in a sudden jolt of adrenaline. Confusion rippled through her tired mind. This wasn't right. This was not her route. She frowned, pulling off her headphones, the sudden silence of the bus interior amplifying her growing unease. Had she miscounted the stops? No, that was impossible. She knew this route cold, every landmark, every turn. She glanced at the driver in the rearview mirror, but his face was obscured by the dim lighting and the thick, swirling fog outside, rendering him a featureless, dark shape. He continued driving straight, his posture rigid, unwavering, an automaton at the wheel. A prickle of icy unease started in her stomach, a tiny spark that quickly spread, slowly but surely, into a full-blown dread. She waited, her heart beginning to beat faster, hoping against hope that he'd correct himself, make an immediate, sharp U-turn, or at least pull over to explain the unexpected deviation. But he didn't. The bus continued straight, driving deeper and deeper into an unfamiliar, forgotten part of the city, a district she vaguely recognized from distant news reports as a sprawling, forgotten industrial zone, filled with abandoned warehouses, dark, looming factories with broken windows and crumbling brick structures. The streetlights here were sparse, flickering erratically, or completely dead, creating an even more oppressive, desolate atmosphere, painting the scene in shades of grey and black. The familiar sounds of the city, the distant rumble of traffic, the faint chatter of late-night pedestrians had completely faded, replaced by the ominous, grinding roo. Sarah's heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs, growing faster and louder with every passing second, mirroring the dread that was now consuming her. She was the only passenger left. The bus was now unmistakably off-route, way off-route. Panic, raw and unadulterated, began to coil in her throat, making it feel constricted, tight. She slowly rose from her seat, her limbs feeling strangely heavy, gripping the cold metallic handrail for support as the bus bounced violently over a particularly deep pothole. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, each movement a desperate act against the growing paralysis. "Excuse me?" she called out, her voice thin, uncertain, swallowed almost entirely by the relentless hum of the engine and the increasing speed. The driver didn't respond. He didn't even twitch a muscle. His gaze remained fixed ahead, unwavering, almost unnervingly still, as if he were part of the machine itself. She took a few more shaky steps, her fear escalating with every footfall, every inch bringing her closer to the terrifying enigma at the front of the bus. "Sir, this isn't the right way. You missed my stop. I need to get off." Her voice was a little louder this time, tinged with a desperate, frantic edge, a plea rather than a demand. Still nothing. He might as well have been a statue, carved from stone, impervious to her words. The silence from him was terrifying, far worse than any argument or angry explanation. It was absolute, unyielding, a profound void that suggested not ignorance, but a deliberate, chilling disregard for her presence. It was as if he hadn't heard her, as if she were a ghost, or simply chose to ignore her existence entirely, transporting her to a destination only he knew. She finally reached the front of the bus, standing just behind the driver's seat, close enough to feel the faint vibrations of the engine. The dashboard lights cast a faint, sickly green glow on his large, calloused hands gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles were white, rigid with an unnatural tension. His face, still mostly obscured by shadow and the thick, swirling fog outside, seemed unnaturally gaunt, almost skeletal, his profile stark and unnerving. She tried desperately to make eye contact in the rearview mirror again, to find any sign of life, any flicker of recognition, but his eyes were just dark, vacant pools, reflecting nothing but the road ahead, as if they were made of glass. She looked out the window, pressing her face against the cold glass. The streets outside were utterly desolate, completely empty. Not a single car, not a single person, no flickering signs of life. Just the towering, derelict industrial buildings and the thick, swirling fog that seemed to swallow all sound and light. The bus was moving faster now, the speed picking up noticeably, unnervingly, the tires hissing on the wet, abandoned asphalt, a relentless whisper of impending doom. "Where are we going?" she demanded again, her voice rising to a desperate, raw shout, a tremor of pure terror making it shake uncontrollably. "You need to pull over. Now. This isn't my route. I want off this bus." She wanted to grab his shoulder, to shake him violently, to force a response, to scream until her lungs burst. But an invisible wall of dread, an insurmountable barrier held her back, paralyzing her. His silence was deafening, a profound void. The only response, the relentless, accelerating hum of the engine and the terrifying, increasing speed. The fear was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing her breath, constricting her chest, a suffocating blanket of dread. She was trapped, utterly trapped on a speeding bus with an unresponsive driver, speeding towards somewhere unknown, somewhere terrifying in the absolute dead of night. She fumbled frantically for her phone, her fingers slick with cold sweat, the device almost slipping from her grasp. She tried to dial 911, but the screen stubbornly displayed no signal. Of course. They were too far out, too deep into this forgotten industrial wasteland, beyond the reach of civilization, beyond help. Her heart pounded a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs, a drum solo of impending doom. She glanced desperately at the emergency exit handle above the door, then back at the driver's unyielding back. Would she have to jump? Would he stop if she pulled it? What would happen if she tried to force her way off? The questions screamed in her mind, each one more horrifying than the last. The bus lurched again, a violent swerve around an unseen obstacle, throwing her against the metal rail. Just as she was about to make a desperate last-ditch decision to try and get off the bus regardless of the risk, to throw herself out into the cold, foggy unknown, the driver suddenly, abruptly, made a sharp right turn onto an even narrower, unlit gravel road. The bus lurched violently, throwing her off balance completely. She slammed into a pole, grunting in pain, a sharp agony shooting through her side, but managed to right herself, clinging desperately to the rail. The bus continued, now driving down a barely paved track, the trees closing in on either side like skeletal, grasping claws, their branches scraping against the bus windows with a horrible, clawing, shrieking sound that grated on her nerves. The air inside the bus seemed to grow colder, heavier, filled with an invisible, oppressive presence. Through the thick, swirling fog outside the windows, she could just make out vague, looming shapes in the distance, what looked like abandoned, dilapidated structures. Not houses, not businesses. Something else. Something ominous. Something ancient and forgotten, rising from the mist like ghostly apparitions. She pressed her face against the cold, damp window, trying desperately to see through the blurring glass, her breath fogging the pain. The bus slowed slightly, then, with a slow, agonizing hydraulic hiss, the doors opened. The driver remained motionless, eyes fixed straight ahead, an unmoving sentinel. The opening revealed only a black, impenetrable void outside, consumed entirely by the swirling fog and oppressive shadow, leading to nowhere she could recognize. Sarah didn't hesitate. With a raw, guttural scream that tore from her throat, a sound she didn't even recognize as her own, she scrambled out of the bus, not daring to look back at the driver, not daring to glance at the dark, horrifying opening she had just escaped. She landed hard on the muddy, unseen ground, the impact jarring her bones, scrambling to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle, ignoring the biting cold, ignoring everything but the desperate, primal need to get away from that bus, from that driver, from whatever lay beyond the fog. She ran blindly into the dense, suffocating fog, stumbling over unseen obstacles until her lungs burned with exertion, until she collapsed against a cold, rusted chain-link fence, gasping for air, her body shaking uncontrollably. When she finally dared to look back, to peer through the swirling mist, the bus was gone. Utterly, completely gone. No lights, no sound, no discernible trace. Swallowed by the fog and the profound, oppressive silence of the industrial wasteland. She eventually stumbled upon a deserted gas station almost an hour later, her clothes torn, mud splattered, and her body shivering uncontrollably from cold and shock, where a horrified, bewildered attendant called the police. Sarah told her story, frantic and incoherent, tears streaming down her face, but despite an extensive search, the police found no trace of the bus, no record of a bus route in that particular area, and no driver matching her vivid, terrified description. The city bus company confirmed that all their vehicles were accounted for and all their drivers were on their assigned routes, none of which ever went into that desolate part of the city at that hour, let alone on a narrow, unpaved track. Sarah never took a bus again, not even in broad daylight, the very sight of one bringing a wave of nausea and terror. She still has nightmares about that silent, unyielding driver and the terrifying detour into the unknown, a journey to a place that shouldn't exist. She wonders obsessively, was it a phantom bus? A ghostly conveyance from another realm? Was the driver even human, or something far more ancient, far more terrifying? And where was that bus truly going? What horrors were waiting at its final, unseen destination beyond the veil of the fog? The questions haunt her, a chilling whisper every time she sees a city bus pass by, a constant nagging reminder that some routes lead to places beyond our comprehension, places that exist only in the darkest corners of reality. The terrifying experience of a bus veering off-route into the unknown is a profound violation of safety, a sudden plunge into existential dread. But what if the terror isn't about the destination, the horrifying place you're being taken, but the journey itself? What if the horror isn't found outside the bus, in the swirling fog or the desolate streets, but quietly, subtly, unfolding within its very confines, beside you in the empty seat next to your own, a silent, unmoving companion from the darkness? Our second deeply unsettling narrative comes from Daniel, a night shift security guard in his late 30s, whose daily routine ended with a long, often solitary bus ride home after midnight. Daniel was a creature of habit, a man of routine, always taking the same seat, 2 rows back on the passenger side, next to the window, a quiet observer of the city's nocturnal rhythms, the muted dramas of the late-night world. The bus was rarely full at that hour, usually just a handful of exhausted commuters, their faces illuminated by phone screens and the occasional oddball, adding a layer of unpredictable human element to the otherwise mundane journey. One particularly rainy Thursday night, the city lights blurred into long, distorted streaks of color on the bus windows, distorted and diffused by the incessant, hammering downpour that seemed to wash the entire world clean, yet also obscured it. Daniel, tired but acutely alert from his shift, settled into his usual seat, the worn fabric molding to his tired form. The bus pulled away from the brightly lit downtown stop with a hydraulic hiss, the engine rumbling softly, a comforting vibration. There were only 3 other passengers on board besides himself and the driver, an elderly woman dozing peacefully near the front, her head nodding gently, a young man engrossed in his phone, the faint glow of the screen illuminating his face, music leaking softly from his headphones, and a figure sitting directly across the aisle from Daniel, 2 seats ahead, seemingly oblivious to the world. This third figure immediately caught Daniel's keen attention. It was a man, dressed in a dark, shapeless, heavy overcoat that seemed to absorb all light, and a wide-brimmed, dark fedora hat that completely obscured his face, casting it in impenetrable shadow. What was truly unusual, however, was his posture. He was sitting absolutely, unnervingly still, rigid, too still. Not like someone asleep, whose body would naturally slump or sway with the motion of the bus, but like a perfectly posed mannequin, an unnatural stiffness. His hands were clasped together on his lap, unmoving, utterly motionless, even as the bus swayed and jolted over potholes and made turns. The silence emanating from him was profound, almost unnatural, especially compared to the gentle snores of the elderly woman or the faint, almost imperceptible music leaking from the young man's headphones. He emitted no sound, no rustle of clothing, no sigh, no creak of the seat. Daniel, a veteran security guard with years of experience observing people and situations, had a keen, almost instinctual eye for anything out of place, any anomaly in human behavior. This man felt profoundly out of place, an anomaly in a sea of predictable movements. He wasn't slumped with exhaustion or relaxed in sleep. He was ramrod straight, unnaturally so. He didn't fidget, didn't shift his weight, didn't scratch an itch, didn't even seem to breathe. Or at least, Daniel couldn't detect the rise and fall of a chest beneath the heavy coat. Daniel tried to dismiss it, to rationalize the unease. Maybe he was just profoundly tired, or perhaps he had a severe physical condition that caused such stillness. But the feeling of unease persisted, growing stronger and colder with every passing minute, slowly morphing his initial curiosity into a cold, creeping dread. He found himself subtly glancing at the man in the dark coat every few seconds, his eyes darting quickly, then returning, drawn by an irresistible, morbid fascination. The bus continued its journey, a steady, rumbling progression through the wet, dark city streets, stopping and starting, letting off the occasional passenger at their designated stops. The elderly woman exited first, a brief interruption of normalcy, then the young man with the headphones. Soon, chillingly, it was just Daniel, the bus driver, and the man in the dark coat. The silence in the bus became oppressive, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to press in on Daniel from all sides, punctuated only by the monotonous hum of the engine and the relentless drumming of rain against the roof and windows. The man in the coat remained perfectly still, a dark, unmoving sentinel, his back to Daniel, his hat still obscuring his face, an impenetrable enigma. Daniel's heart began to pound, a frantic, almost painful thump against his ribs. He was suddenly acutely aware of his profound isolation. He was trapped in a moving vehicle with this silent, unnerving companion, a stranger who defied all normal human behavior. He pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through messages, his thumb hovering over the screen, but his eyes kept darting to the man, an irresistible pull. He noticed something else now, something that made his blood run cold, chilling him to the bone despite the bus's warmth. Despite the bus's constant movement, despite the bumps and turns of the road, despite the jarring potholes, the man's hat never shifted. Not even slightly. It was as if it was glued to his head, a permanent fixture. And the coat, too, seemed to cling to him in an unnatural way, revealing no hint of the body beneath, no curve of a shoulder, no outline of a limb. It was simply a dark, featureless shroud. He tried to force himself to look away, to break the terrifying magnetic pull, but he couldn't. His gaze was drawn back to the man, to the unnerving stillness, the impossible lack of movement. He noticed something else now, too faint to be certain, almost subliminal, but chillingly suggestive. A faint, almost imperceptible smell. A faint, sweet, cloying odor, like stale, forgotten flowers, mixed with something vaguely metallic, like old blood or rust. It was subtle, almost imagined, a fleeting whisper on the air, but it prickled at his nose, making his stomach churn, a wave of nausea washing over him. The bus was approaching Daniel's stop now, the streetlights of his neighborhood starting to appear in the distance. He had a choice to make, a terrifying dilemma. He could stay on, prolonging the horrifying encounter, waiting to see what the man would do, where he would go, what he would reveal. Or he could get off, escape this terrifying encounter, fleeing from the unknown. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed to get off, to escape the suffocating presence. He pressed the stop request button, the familiar chime startlingly loud, almost explosive in the quiet bus, shattering the oppressive silence. The man in the coat remained utterly motionless, unaffected, seemingly unaware. As the bus slowed, preparing to pull over, Daniel saw it, a final, horrifying detail that sealed his terror. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the man's coat. A slight, almost involuntary shudder, like a ripple across water. It was the first sign of movement he had seen from the man, and it was infinitely worse than the stillness. It wasn't human movement, not a shrug or a stretch. It was more like something adjusting, something settling into itself, a subtle realignment of something unnatural, something that was not truly fixed. The bus came to a complete stop, its air brakes hissing loudly. The doors hissed open. Daniel, fueled by a pure, desperate surge of adrenaline, practically leapt from his seat, his legs shaking uncontrollably. He rushed towards the exit, his eyes fixed on the man in the coat, half expecting him to turn, to stand up, to reveal something horrifying beneath that hat and coat. But the man remained utterly still, a dark, silent sentinel, his back to Daniel, an unyielding monument to an unknown horror. Daniel stumbled off the bus, gasping for breath. The cold rain, a sudden, shocking deluge against his face, instantly soaking his clothes. He didn't look back at the bus as it pulled away, its red taillights disappearing quickly into the rainy night. He ran, not caring where he was going or who might see him, until he reached the relative safety of his apartment building, his heart still pounding. He never found an explanation for the man on the bus. He never saw him again, not on that route, not anywhere. But the memory of that unnatural stillness, the unshifting hat, the faint, disturbing smell, and that final, subtle tremor haunted him. He still finds himself scanning bus interiors, looking for anything out of place, anything too still, anything that defies the normal flow of human movement. He wonders often with a cold knot in his stomach. Was it a person in a profound fugue state, a victim of some unknown horror? Or was it something else entirely, something that simply rode the bus, a silent companion from a world not his own, a world of shadows and impossible presences? What was beneath that hat, behind that impenetrable shadow? And why was it so still? The questions linger, a chilling whisper every time he boards a late-night bus, a constant nagging reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters don't roar, they don't chase, they just sit silently beside you, waiting for you to notice. The silent, unnerving presence of a fellow passenger is a potent fear, twisting the mundane into the monstrous, turning a routine journey into a nightmare. But what if the horror isn't a person or entity inside the bus, something you can almost rationalize, but something profoundly, indescribably alien, pressing against the very fabric of reality just outside your window, visible only to you, turning your familiar route into a terrifying, solitary nightmare, a secret terror you can never share. Our final horrifying account comes from Chloe, a young artist in her early 20s who lived on the far edge of the city, requiring a lengthy multi-transfer bus journey home after her evening art classes at a downtown academy. Her preferred time to travel was always late at night, when the buses were quieter, mostly empty, allowing her to sketch freely in her notebook or listen to music undisturbed, lost in her own creative world, her mind open to inspiration. One particularly dark and stormy night, the rain was lashing down with an almost violent intensity, a torrential deluge that hammered against the bus windows and roof. The city lights blurred into abstract streaks of vibrant color, reds, blues, greens, distorted by the incessant downpour, transforming the urban landscape into a surreal, watery painting. Chloe was on her final bus, the express route that took her out to the quieter suburbs. She had her sketchbook open on her lap, headphones on, trying to capture the distorted, fluid beauty of the rain on the window pane, the way the light fractured and danced through the cascading water. The bus was almost entirely empty, save for her, the bus driver, a silent, solitary figure at the front, and a lone figure slumped near the front, apparently asleep. She was engrossed in her drawing, her pen meticulously tracing the paths of the raindrops as they raced each other down the glass, when she saw it, a flicker in the rain-streaked darkness outside her window, a shape. She blinked, thinking it was just a distortion from the water, or perhaps a fleeting reflection from inside the bus. But then it was there again, more distinct. An unnerving shape pressed against the glass, just outside her window, keeping perfect, horrifying pace with the moving bus. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird suddenly trapped in a cage. It was a face, not a human face, not clearly defined in the way a human face would be, but undeniably a face. It was flat, almost two-dimensional, like a drawing pressed against glass or a picture on a piece of paper. It had no color, only shades of gray and black, a monochromatic horror blurred and smeared by the relentless rain. and it had two enormous, dark, unblinking eyes that seemed to pierce through the rain, through the glass, through the very fabric of the bus, fixed directly on her, a gaze of fathomless depth. Chloe froze, her hand gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles whitened, the plastic digging painfully into her skin. She pulled off her headphones, the sudden roar of the rain against the bus and the hum of the engine deafening in the sudden silence of her personal space. She wanted to scream, to unleash the raw, visceral terror building in her chest, but no sound escaped her throat. Her vocal cords felt constricted, useless. The face remained pressed against the glass, its featureless, flat surface distorted by the rain and the bus's speed. Yet its eyes were chillingly clear, fathomless pools of black that held an unsettling alien intelligence, a knowing gaze that cut deep into her soul. It wasn't just there, it was looking at her. It was observing her with an unnerving intensity, a silent, predatory curiosity. She tried desperately to rationalize it, to find any logical explanation that could dispel the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. A hallucination? Exhaustion from late-night classes? Her imagination playing cruel tricks? But the face was too real, too persistent, too undeniably present. It moved with the bus, staying perfectly aligned with her window, its unwavering gaze locked onto her. It wasn't a reflection from inside the bus. There was nothing in the bus that could create such a distinct, terrifying image. And it was definitely, unmistakably, outside. She glanced frantically at the other passenger, the slumped figure near the front of the bus. They were still slumped, deeply asleep, oblivious to the horror unfolding just a few rows behind them. She looked at the bus driver in the rearview mirror, trying to catch his eye. His eyes were fixed on the road, his expression placid, oblivious too. No one else saw it, only her. The terrifying realization that she was utterly alone in this vision, that this horrifying encounter was hers and hers alone, gripped her with an icy, suffocating dread. She was a singular witness to an impossible reality. The face began to change. Slowly, the flat surface seemed to ripple, to almost undulate like water or a membrane, as if it were trying to push through the glass to penetrate the barrier between their two worlds. The dark eyes seemed to widen, to deepen, absorbing more and more of the dim light from the bus interior, becoming vast, consuming voids. A thin, almost imperceptible line began to form where a mouth might be, but it wasn't opening in a recognizable way. It was just forming, a terrifying, silent suggestion, a potential for an unspeakable utterance. The air inside the bus seemed to grow colder, heavier, even though the heating was on, a chill radiating directly from the horrifying entity outside. Chloe pressed herself against the seat, trying to shrink away from the window, to become invisible, but she couldn't tear her eyes from the horrifying spectacle. Her gaze was locked, transfixed by the alien presence. The face was too close, too persistent, too unnerving in its silent observation. It seemed to embody a profound, ancient sadness, a weariness beyond human comprehension, yet also an undeniable, terrifying curiosity, an alien intelligence observing her with a silent, calculating intensity that spoke of immense power. The bus finally approached her stop, the familiar streetlights of her neighborhood appearing through the rain, usually a welcome sight, now felt like a desperate, fragile beacon of sanity. The face remained pressed against the window, moving with the bus, its unwavering gaze fixed on her, until the very last second. As the bus slowed and the doors hissed open, the face seemed to ripple once more, a final, chilling undulation, then stretched, elongated, distorting grotesquely, and finally vanished into the rain and darkness as if it were never there, dissolving into the elements, leaving no trace behind but the indelible image in her mind. Chloe stumbled off the bus, barely able to stand, her legs feeling like jelly, gasping for breath, the cold rain a sudden, shocking deluge against her face, bringing her back to a terrifying reality. She didn't look back at the bus as it pulled away, disappearing into the suburban night. She ran home, sprinting through the rain-soaked streets, her mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief, locking every door and window, pulling all the curtains tightly shut, and spent the rest of the night huddled under her blankets, the image of that flat, featureless face and its enormous, dark, unblinking eyes seared into her mind, a permanent, horrifying tattoo on her psyche. She never took a late-night bus again. She avoided public transport whenever possible, haunted by the memory. She still wonders with a chilling certainty, what was that face? Was it a spirit, a demon, or something entirely alien? A creature from another dimension glimpsed through the thinning veil of a rainy night, the boundaries between worlds blurring in the storm. Why did it choose her? Why did it only appear to her, leaving her isolated in her terror? The questions haunt her, a chilling reminder that sometimes what you see out the window is far more terrifying than what's inside the bus, and some things follow you home, even if no one else believes you, forever leaving their imprint on your reality. These stories are a chilling reminder that the anonymity and routine of a late-night bus ride can be terrifyingly fragile, a thin veneer over profound, unseen horrors. When the city sleeps, when the familiar glow of streetlights fades and the ordinary becomes unsettling, something else may be waiting. A silent driver taking you to an unknown destination, an unmoving, sinister companion sharing your seat, or a horrifying alien face pressed against the glass, visible only to you. Have you ever experienced anything truly terrifying during a late-night bus ride? A strange stop, an unsettling passenger, a glimpse of the impossible, a vision that defied all logic? Share your story in the comments below. We want to hear your encounters with the unsettling unknown, your brushes with the bizarre and the horrifying. If these tales sent shivers down your spine and made you check the bus schedule twice, made you glance nervously at your fellow passengers, hit that like button, subscribe for more chilling true stories that push the boundaries of reality, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unsettling unknown. Until then, remember, every ride holds a secret. And some secrets prefer the darkness, waiting for the cover of night to reveal themselves. Sleep tight.